Could Piccolo after the 3-year time skip actually beat Mecha Frieza? Now at first the question might sound ridiculous. We all know what happens when the androids finally show up. The Z-Fighters get completely overwhelmed, Vegeta gets humbled, and Piccolo realizes pretty quickly that they're dealing with a threat at an entirely different level. But there's something interesting about Piccolo during this first part of the story that I think is overlooked. After Goku warns everyone about the android, Piccolo spends 3 full years training alongside Goku and Gohan specifically to prepare for them. And when those 3 years are over, the Piccolo we see is significantly stronger than the one who fought on Namek. The problem is, Dragon Ball never stops to tell us exactly how much stronger he became. And once you start looking at his performance against Android 20, comparing it to the other fighters, and paying attention to what Piccolo himself says about his strength, things start getting real interesting. Because depending on how you interpret some of these moments, pre-fusion Piccolo might have been way stronger than most people give him credit for. So today, I want to figure out exactly how strong Piccolo became during his 3 years and answer one question. Could 3-year time skip Piccolo actually defeat the tyrant Frieza? Before the Android saga truly gets underway, there's an entire stretch of the story that quietly establishes just how much Piccolo is improving. A lot of the attention naturally goes towards Trunks, Goku, and Vegeta becoming Super Saiyans, but if you follow what the manga is showing with Piccolo in the background, his progression is actually one of the most impressive parts of this period. It starts with Frieza's unexpected return. Somehow surviving Namek, Frieza has been reconstructed as Mecha Frieza, and this time he's coming to Earth with King Cold. From the perspective of the Z-Fighters, this is a nightmare scenario. They barely survived Frieza the first time, Goku hasn't returned yet, and now Frieza has arrived with another member of his family. Everyone gathers in preparation for what they assume could be another desperate battle. There's a small interaction here involving Vegeta and Piccolo that I think deserves more attention than it usually gets. Piccolo manages to conceal his ki so effectively that Vegeta doesn't initially realize he's nearby. Once Vegeta notices what he's done, he actually acknowledges Piccolo's ability as a warrior. Considering Vegeta's attitude towards basically everyone around him during this period, earning even that small amount of respect is significant. Piccolo isn't suddenly stronger than Vegeta here, but his skill and control have clearly reached a level Vegeta can completely dismiss. That scene also gives us something important to remember when looking at Piccolo's strength throughout Dragon Ball. Characters who understand ki aren't constantly walking around at their maximum battle power. They can lower their energy, hide their presence, and dramatically increase their output when they actually need to fight. Piccolo is particularly skilled at this, which means some of his lower readings or seemingly unimpressive showings shouldn't automatically be treated as demonstration of everything he had available. Before the Z-Fighters can actually confront Frieza themselves, Trunks appears and completely changes the situation. He becomes a Super Saiyan and destroys Mecha Frieza almost immediately before doing the same to King Cold. It's one of the most dominant character introductions in the series, especially considering Frieza had been the main villain of the entire previous arc. There's also an interesting detail involving Frieza and King Cold before they're killed. Frieza continues describing himself as the strongest being in the universe despite standing directly beside his father. King Cold never challenges that claim. This doesn't give us a numerical battle for Cold, but it does give us some context for how the two are portrayed. Nothing in the exchange suggests that Cold considers Frieza's statement ridiculous or believes he himself is secretly several levels beyond his son. That's worth mentioning because there's always been speculation surrounding King Cold's potential transformation. Since Frieza used multiple suppressed forms in Namek, it's understandable that people wonder whether Cold could do something similar. The problem is there's very little in the original manga supporting the idea that King Cold had some hidden transformation that could suddenly place him massively above Frieza. Cold clearly has some confidence in his own strength, and he seems to believe that adding himself to this situation can help deal with Goku, so he shouldn't be treated as irrelevant. At the same time, Frieza openly maintaining his status as the universe's strongest while Cold is standing beside him strongly favors Frieza being the superior fighter. It also fits everything we just saw in Namek. Frieza's entire identity was built around his belief that nobody could surpass him. That's part of why Goku becoming a Super Saiyan affected him so badly. Frieza wasn't simply losing a battle, he was watching the worldview he'd carry his entire life collapse in front of him. If King Cold could casually transform and become vastly stronger whenever he wanted, Frieza's obsession with being the strongest becomes much more harder to reconcile with how the relationship is presented. Trunks makes the debate almost irrelevant anyways because he kills both of them without much difficulty. He then waits for Goku to return, and this gives us another useful comparison. After Goku finally arrives from Yardrat, Trunks tests him by transforming into a Super Saiyan and attacking him with a sword. Goku responds by blocking the blade with a single finger. The context matters here because Goku later recognizes that Trunks wasn't attacking with everything he had. This wasn't Trunks generally trying to slice Goku in half with maximum power. So I wouldn't use the scene to argue that Goku's fingers somehow scales above Trunks' absolute strongest attack. What it does show is Goku's confidence and control. Trunks had just used that same weapon while completely dismantling Frieza, yet Goku is comfortable enough to stand there with his own abilities and intercept it with one finger. There's also a strange Piccolo feat happening during this conversation that doesn't have anything to do with raw battle power. Piccolo is positioned over a mile away from Goku and Trunks and still manages to hear what they're discussing. That's how he learns about the future android threat despite Goku originally intending to keep Trunks' information private. The Mechans obviously have incredible hearing, but the distance involved makes this one of those smaller Dragon Ball feats that's easy to overlook. Trunks' warning gives everyone 3 years before the androids are supposed to arrive. In some of his material, there's also the famous numbering issue where the future androids are referred to as 19 and 20, even though the character's Trunks is actually warning them about ultimately corresponds to 17 and 18. Regardless of the numbering issue, the message itself is clear. 3 years from now, enemies strong enough to destroy the future Z-Fighters are coming. That changes everyone's priorities. Instead of waiting for the androids to appear and hoping for the best, the group decides to spend the entire 3-year period preparing. Krillin even makes the basic logic behind their decision clear. If they don't believe there's any possibility of becoming strong enough to fight the androids, there's no reason for them to show up when the day comes. The story makes it clear that he hasn't simply been sitting around since Namek. He continues working on himself. Now the android warning gives him an even greater reason to push his limits. More importantly, Piccolo gains access to a training partner who completely changes what his preparation can look like. For the next 3 years, Piccolo gets to work directly alongside the strongest fighter on Earth. Goku isn't restricting himself to the level he had before Namek either. The manga shows him using Super Saiyan during their training, meaning Piccolo is regularly exposed to a level of power that previously stood completely beyond him. That detail becomes extremely important when judging Android Saga Piccolo. Training by yourself can obviously make a character stronger in Dragon Ball, but having someone massively above you to chase gives you an entirely different benchmark. Piccolo gets 3 years of seeing Super Saiyan power firsthand, learning Goku's movements, testing himself against him, and gradually adjusting to a level of combat that would have been imaginable for him earlier in the series. We start seeing the results almost immediately when the Android 19 and 20 appear. Goku takes the first major fight and transforms into a Super Saiyan against Android 19. At first, the situation appears manageable, but Goku's condition rapidly deteriorates. The heart virus Trunks warned him about begins affecting him during the battle, draining his stamina and preventing him from fighting anywhere near his normal level. One of the more interesting details is how quickly Piccolo recognizes the problem. Tien doesn't immediately understand why Goku's performance seems unusual, while Piccolo knows something is wrong. That makes complete sense when you consider what happened during the time skip. Piccolo has spent 3 years training with Goku and understands what a Super Saiyan should look like. He's in a much better position than most of the group to recognize that the Goku fighting Android 19 isn't performing normally. With Goku unable to continue, Vegeta finally gets his opportunity to reveal what he's been doing the same 3 years. He transforms into a Super Saiyan and completely takes control of the battle against Android 19. Piccolo is impressed enough by Vegeta's performance that he considers the possibility that Vegeta may have surpassed Goku at this point. There's another factor where Android 19 is easy to miss. By the time Vegeta really starts fighting him, 19 has already absorbed a substantial amount of Goku's energy. Since Goku was transformed when the absorption occurred, 19 isn't necessarily operating at the same level he had when the battle began. He has gained additional energy from Goku, and Vegeta still manages to overwhelm and destroy him. Vegeta isn't completely unaffected by the battle, though between using Super Saiyan and dealing with Android 19, his energy and stamina have dropped enough that Dr. Gero began thinking he might have an opportunity against him. Vegeta famously uses his confidence to keep Dr. Gero uncertain about how exhausted he is, which helps prevent Gero from immediately committing to a direct confrontation. He manages to take energy from Vegeta, and he also absorbs energy from Piccolo. This should theoretically put him at an even better position than before. Piccolo is also still associated with his weighted clothing around this portion of the encounter, adding another detail to just how much strength he's capable of concealing. Then Piccolo gets serious, and Gero gets destroyed. Despite Gero's absorption ability, and the energy he's already taken from powerful fighters, Piccolo immediately overwhelms him once they're actually fighting directly. Gero can't properly keep up with him, and the rest of the Z fighters are shocked by how powerful Piccolo has become. The reactions are arguably just as important as the fight itself. Piccolo has reached a point where his strength is beginning to enter conversations involving Super Saiyan level fighters. Even if we don't immediately declare him equal to every Super Saiyan based on one encounter, he's clearly operating in a completely different category from the Piccolo we knew before the time skip. And this is all happening before Piccolo merges with Kami. That's a detail that makes his progression so ridiculous. The Piccolo who humiliates Gero hasn't received his biggest Android Saga power increase yet. This is essentially the result of Nell's fusion combined with Piccolo's own continued improvement in a 3-year training period. It also makes Gohan extremely interesting. Gohan spent those same 3 years training with Goku and Piccolo. We know how rapidly Saiyans can improve when they're pushed by stronger opponents, and Gohan's and Gohan has already demonstrated throughout the series that his potential can produce enormous jumps whenever he's properly motivated or enraged. If Piccolo can grow this much during their preparation, Gohan's development during the same period becomes something we have to consider as well. The first encounters with the androids even leave Piccolo questioning the situation. Trunks describe enemies who completely destroyed the fighters of his future, yet androids 19 and 20 aren't producing the same hopeless battle everyone expected. Vegeta can destroy 19, and Piccolo can dominate 20. From their perspective, there are two possibilities. Either something about the android doesn't match Trunks' warning, or the 3 years of preparation made the Z fighters far stronger than they expected. The androids Trunks feared hadn't actually entered the fight yet, but before 17 and 18 completely changed the situation, the early android saga gives us a very important picture of Piccolo. He has gone from someone completely overshadowed by the Super Saiyan to a fighter powerful enough that his strength can't be ignored in those conversations anymore. And the craziest part is that this version of Piccolo is still incomplete. He's about to receive another increase that completely changes where he stands amongst the strongest characters on Earth. And once that happens, comparing him to a Super Saiyan stops being speculation and becomes a very serious part of the story. Next, we need to go back to one of the most important measuring sticks for power in Dragon Ball, Frieza during the Namek Saga. Frieza's transformation gives us a surprisingly useful way of tracking how quickly the scale of the series was expanding, especially when we eventually start comparing these characters to Piccolo, Goku, Vegeta, and the androids. The version of Frieza most people probably picture is his original form, calmly floating around Namek in his hoverpod while his soldiers carry out his orders. According to official material, Frieza's first form has a battle power of 530,000, which was an absolutely ridiculous number at this stage of the series. Captain Ginyu, the strongest member of the Ginyu Force, was only around 120,000. Meaning Frieza in his weakest form was already more than 4 times stronger than the most powerful fighter in his personal squad. Vegeta had also grown tremendously throughout Namek. Between his battles, near-death experiences, Saiyan recovery or Zenkai boosts, he had gone from struggling with fighters like Zarbon to surpassing most of Frieza's elite soldiers. By the time he directly confronts Frieza, Vegeta can reasonably be placed around 250 to 300,000, depending on how you interpret the scaling. Even after all that growth, though it's still nowhere near Frieza's 530,000 maximum. It's also important to remember how characters at this level actually use their power. Frieza having a maximum of 530,000 doesn't mean every movement or attack he makes is carrying that full amount of power. Like the Z fighters, Frieza can regulate his output, and throughout Namek, he repeatedly uses only as much strength as he feels is necessary. That fits his personality perfectly because Frieza loves controlling a fight. He'd rather demonstrate how hopeless the situation is than immediately end things, especially against someone like Vegeta. Official guideline scaling commonly places this full power Frieza at approximately 120 million, while Super Saiyan Goku is generally placed around 150 million. Mecha Frieza arrives on Earth believing he's prepared to get revenge on Goku, only for Trunks to transform and dispose of him almost immediately. From then on forward, Frieza becomes a useful reference point for showing just how dangerous the next generation of enemies is supposed to be. Goku can comfortably deal with Trunks' test when he returns from Yardrat, and then Trunks warns everyone about enemies from the future who are beyond what even he can handle. That progression matters for Piccolo because he hears Trunks' warning and still chooses to spend the next 3 years preparing for that fight. Everyone understands what Super Saiyan power looks like by this point. They know what happened to Frieza, and Piccolo knows that Trunks is warning them about opponents capable of defeating fighters in that general class. If Piccolo's goal after 3 years was merely to approach the level Frieza had already occupied, he still would have been hopelessly behind the threat they were preparing to face. The entire purpose of his training was to make himself relevant against enemies who were expected to exist beyond that old benchmark. And Piccolo wasn't spending those 3 years training in isolation. He was working directly with Goku and Gohan, which gives him an enormous advantage compared to his many earlier training periods. Goku had returned from Yardrat stronger than the version who defeated Frieza, and he was capable of transforming into a Super Saiyan during their session. The manga actually depicts Piccolo participating in his training while Goku is transformed. Piccolo has spent years preparing specifically for opponents who were expected to make Frieza level power irrelevant, and when those opponents finally appear, he's strong enough to dominate one of them even after having some of his energy absorbed. In other words, Piccolo doesn't need Kami to surpass Frieza. He had already done it through training.